Okay. I'd like to welcome you at the webinar hosted by Montessori Institute Prague. My name is Mirka and I'm the director of the Institute. And I will give the word to Carla Foster, the AMI trainer, just in a minute. The program today is going to take about half an hour. Carla will speak for about 30 minutes. And then we will have some time for questions and answers. Originally, we planned for an hour of questions and answers. Unfortunately, something important arose and we have to finish at 7 o'clock. But if some questions remain unanswered, we will make sure to get the answers to you in some form. So we'll see how many questions come to us, and we'll let you all know how the answers will be provided if we have some left over. Can you, on the chat, give me a message? You can hear me well? Because I can see the chat right there, and if you say everything's okay, you have a good sound and you have a good visual as well? Great. Thank you, Noemi. Everyone else okay? We have 77 people and adding more, so it's wonderful. More than 300 people signed up. Great. Okay. So everything's set up, and it's my pleasure to give the word to Carla Foster now, who was so kind to spend some time with us.
Right. Before there was the first boat, there was no name for boat. Before there was the first boat, there was only a problem to solve of how to travel on water. But perhaps if we go back far enough in time, we might see some people living by the lake. They're there because there's fresh water to be had, fish to be caught, and plants that can be harvested. There may be berries growing on the other side of the lake. But it's a long walk to the other side of the lake and back. Slashing through the undergrowth exhausts the people. Sometimes they can follow animal tracks, but often they must make their own, and the plants gobble up the paths every summer. And someone might be thinking, if we could cross the water like the ducks, we might be able to get there and back again with much less effort. But even if we learn to move in the water like ducks or fish, carrying the berries back could be a problem. But if only we had something we could ride, something that could float, so we could carry our baskets with us. So the people may have looked around and experimented. What can float? They may have noticed that even some heavy logs seem to be able to float. They may have experimented. Do some logs float and others not? Does drying out the logs help them to float? Why would that be? If you're curious about that, we could do some experiments in our classrooms about floating. You could imagine that those people were putting their heads together and talking about all of this, what worked, what didn't, and trying to imagine why. And when they did find some logs that floated, maybe they tried riding them, but that might have caused even more problems. Single logs have a tendency to roll, and those people may have spent more time in the water than on top of it. And we don't know who, but someone must have asked the question, what could keep logs from rolling? And another person may have answered, what if we bound several together? People were making baskets and weaving, and we know they were braiding and twisting vines and other plant fibers to make ropes. So they probably started making ropes to tie the logs together. They must have cooperated a lot. Some people had to cut the trees, and they had to work together to carry them to the shore and bind them together. But the result was amazing. And of course, since people are people, they had to give this invention a name. And wherever they might have been, they invented a word that they could all agree upon. In our language, English, it became known as a raft, which comes from the Old Norse word, rafter, which means beam. We also get the word rafter from the same source. And there is a fast-growing tree that has very lightweight wood that we call balsa, which comes from the Spanish word for raft. Next slide, please. But these were not the only experiments that people were trying out in order to travel on water. They were noticing that it was hard to keep a raft moving in one direction. So they started experimenting with the shape of the craft. Curved logs seemed to work better, and a tapered shape. When the front and back were more pointed, it was easier to direct the craft. And some people were tying bundles of reeds or bamboo together to make rafts. Reeds were often plentiful along the rivers and the shores of lakes. And when the reeds were bound so that there were sides to the raft, the rafts looked more like the boats that we know. And some people were taking logs and hollowing them out. This required more sophisticated tools which had to be invented. You needed special axes, chisels, and adzes. First, those were made of stone, but later metal. And those types of boats are called dugout canoes. Where do we get the word for canoe? We get it from the Native Americans of the Caribbean Sea, the Arawak. But when did this happen? When did people start finding ways to transport themselves over water? The oldest dugout canoe that we have found is over 8,000 years old, but we found 12,000 years. But we have to go farther back in time to find the first boats, although our chances of actually finding an ancient boat or a raft are almost zero, since they do not preserve well. But when we think about the fact that even the human species before our species, Homo sapiens, migrated along the coasts and even crossed the seas, then we do know that they were making something to do that with, as far back as 500,000 years ago. But the story of boats, as you know, did not stop with rafts and dugout canoes. People all over the world experimented and made designs for different types of water transport. And maybe many of you might be interested in finding out what was done to help the boats move in a straight line, or when the sails were invented. And if you're interested in making a timeline, we have some rolls of paper that you could use. And if you wish, you could organize a trip to the library to get some books about transport on water. That is my story for today. Now that is a kind of an origin story, a true-ish story, though the actual facts of the first boats are lost to us. And what we do know, though, is that the human beings were using the gifts of their hands and their mind to make things, to solve the problems of everyday life. Now, most children in modern post-industrial societies do very little themselves to solve the practical problems of everyday life. They do not hunt for their food or gather their food, and fewer children even know very much about where their food comes from. They do not build their own shelters, nor their own means of transport. And this means that their physical needs cannot be the main motivating force for creativity and invention in such generations as these who do not need to be creative for their very survival. So where can the motivation for creativity come from? Well, we have to assume that even children brought up with every modern convenience are at some level curious about the origins of things. They want to know the how and the why of how things have come about. And we also have to assume that they have the same inner drives that led human beings to both adapt to, but also transform their environment, and that they want to use them. And in the beginning, it was their physical needs that powered the drives on this slide. We call them the tendencies: exploration, orientation, order, observation, imagination, work, exactness, gregariousness, communication, and there are others. And we can also assume that the children have spiritual needs, the need to feel a sense of belonging, to have an appreciation of beauty, the need to produce art and music, the need to wonder, or the need to love their environment. So we can serve development by keeping those needs, those spiritual needs, and the tendencies alive in our activities in the classroom and also in our stories. Stories of everyday objects are not just about things, they're about us. We have to find a way for the children to walk the path that humans before us have done, from problem to experimentation, from solution to variation, and the perfection of process and product. They, the children, can do it with their imaginations, but we can do it by crafting our stories from the bottom up rather than the top down. And we find top-down stories and explanations in encyclopedias. If we look up boat, we find the following definition. Boat. A boat is a watercraft of a large range of sizes designed to float, plane, work, or travel on water. Boats have a wide variety of shapes, sizes, and construction methods due to their intended purpose, available materials, or local traditions. But this explanation doesn't have much to do with the drive to invent a boat. If we're going to put children in contact with people and help them appreciate the work of those people, we have to establish a dilemma. We have to ask the children to take their minds back in time before the invention ever took place, when actual need was driving human beings to action. So we need to help the children then walk with those human beings as they observed their environment. What could they learn from? What might have helped them to create an image of a solution? And then the real hard part comes, the realization of the solution. And now comes experimentation, trial, and more likely, error. And it may be important to really stress that people learned as much from their errors as their successes. And it is here that we can bring in the moral muscles that may have been needed, like persistence or bravery, patience, and exactness. And then we cannot forget to talk about the significance of cooperation and communication. Very few significant inventions are one-man or one-woman shows, because we are a social animal, and we are better when we put our heads together. But there is no name until the thing is made. In contrast to an encyclopedia, we can save the name until later on in our story. And we want to think about the name together with the children, perhaps giving an etymology, or thinking about what the name may refer to, or how the invention may have had different names in different places. In this way, we also can emphasize the importance that giving names has for us. We give names to the world so that we can orient ourselves better and communicate more accurately. We give general names when we notice similarities, and we give more and more specific names when we see differences. What other interesting consequences did the invention have? Well, we may only want to hint at what the invention has done for human beings and leave the children to think about it. But we may also want to encourage the children to find out more. We may have something they can try, like trying out what kinds of wood float better than others. Now, there are a lot of objects that children could hear stories about, stories that might help them appreciate diversity, and stories that might help unlock some creative problem-solving motivation in them as well. One very important thing we must do is always emphasize human work, the work that involves maximum effort for maximum satisfaction. There might be a sacrifice needed, or danger, or adventure. There will be victories and there will be defeats. But the theme of all of our stories is that human beings do not give up, and that we were successful as a species just because we were never quite satisfied, but kept on searching for new solutions to problems. The stories of everyday objects need to be told orally from human being to human being. And then we also need to make sure that there are activities in the classroom so that the children can do something to embody the story. If the story is about the history of pottery, there should be clay. If it is a story of felting, we need to have the materials so the children can make felt. And in this way, the children can both physically and emotionally feel and experience what they've only experienced intellectually with their imaginations. Stories lead to practical life experiences. Practical life experiences lead to more stories. And the stories can lead to studies in all areas of geography and biology as well. For example, the story of pottery is also the story of a river. But let's look again at some of the main things to think about when you want to craft a story about an everyday object. You have to start by taking the children back in time. You use what they know to help them strip away all that's been invented since the invention that you want to talk about. You want them to see something in their minds, like creating a little play. Who are the people? What do they know about the world? What do they desire? And what do they wonder about? Next slide. Then you also want to be careful about the verbs you use. Try to make them active rather than passive verbs. Try to get rid of is and was and has. Think like a novelist with a plot line that you can follow. And don't just describe the object from a distance. Get into the making and the thinking and the doing. And then you can always use some literature elements, like things from fairy tales, a repetition of something, or a journey, or the fact that help might come from unexpected sources. So you always want to stay true to your facts, but don't report them, because the children will want to find facts on their own. But you need to give them the glue of truth that they can use to bind the facts together. Next slide. Then you do want to be explicit about mentioning the tendencies, about what it is that human beings had to do to get things done. And you don't have to mention all of them in every story, but make sure that you are using the tendencies as a reference point for all of the work that happens in the story. Next slide. And because all good stories have conflict and plot and difficulties, make sure that you can create or add some difficulties to the story so that you can show how the people encountered and surmounted those difficulties, and that they didn't always just do it by themselves, but they also did it together. Because great effort should never be felt like, the children should not feel that great effort was ever wasted. Next slide, please. No, not next slide. Okay, right. So stories told in this way have another effect on the children. They also help the children to become better storytellers of the truth themselves. They help them to take a point of view. They help them transform facts into more creative nonfiction. They help them to move away from copying the sources and towards expressing their own narrative voice. The children will become better writers by hearing better oral stories. Now, these stories told from the bottom up, starting with a dilemma, give the opportunity for a real plot and for the active verb. Top-down stories do use a lot of passive voice. They use a lot of is and was and has. And they lack a narrative structure that appeals to the children. Children like action. Good plots have conflicts. Bottom-up stories of invention are full of conflict and dilemma and error and resolution. But top-down encyclopedic stories tell the end of the story first, and that does not really appeal to the imagination. We have to remember that the road from a flint striker to a match was not without peril. Another thing to think about is that our children are hero worshippers at this age. Let us make sure that they have these ordinary people as heroes and not just extraordinary people with historical names. The unglamorous can be made quite exciting when we use our human tendencies as the guide for our storytelling. Exploring and celebrating everyday objects also can unlock the inventor in the children, as singing together could unlock a musician in them. We could also plan to do more types of research. Ask the question, where does your house come from? The shelter itself, most of us take for granted. But where do the raw materials come? What countries produce the raw materials? What kinds of occupations are involved in creating the bricks, the windows, the beams, the roofing tiles? This could be an exciting in-depth research of a complex everyday object that would take the children both back to nature, but also help them understand what Montessori called the sopranatura, the global society that they live in and how interdependent it is. Social justice issues will probably arise in that kind of research, and that too would be an aid to the development of the moral conscience. In our stories of human work and achievement, we highlight the tendencies of humans and therefore what it is to be a human being. We are the species who explores, who wonders, who imagines, who chats. We're the species who is restless. We are the craftsmen who are patient. The tendencies are in a way like the skeleton of our body. They built who we are. And then the virtues, the moral muscles that make us successful, are also there at birth, but have to be trained and exercised all the time, just as an athlete needs to train the physical muscles. Patience, persistence, a sense of humor, cooperation, all of those are the responsibility of every individual to develop and the responsibility of the environment to foster. We can't force the children to invent the wheel anew so that they will be grateful for it. But through these kinds of stories, we might be able to help them to believe that they could have invented it. Last slide, please. We are not in the entertainment business, nor in just the information business, but the enlightenment business. That is the storytelling of the truth in cosmic education. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Carla. And we can go to the questions and answers time now. This was a wonderful, I tried to think if this was a speech, not a speech.
A story.
And now everyone, please think you have this precious 30 minutes with Carla, and you know she's a well of experience. Carla, I can see on this YouTube feed here that everybody says thank you for sharing, Carla. People are really enjoying it. 94 people have been watching us. So you all please go ahead and think about questions, and we'll share it with Carla, and she'll try to answer your questions. Okay, so maybe I will just read, Carla. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So someone is asking, how often would you give children a new story?
That it really wouldn't matter, because you'd want to actually observe what the children might do with the story. Whether or not, if they don't bite and nothing happens, then you'd want to give another one sometime soon. But if they do bite, then you don't want to then derail them by telling another story right away. Although you might tell a different story to a different group.
Okay, thank you. Another question. How many such stories a day would you recommend to tell in a classroom? So I think maybe that's a similar question, but I'll share it with you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there is such a thing as too much. And that is when your storytelling prevents the children from getting on with their own work. So you do have to remember that you're doing this to inspire them to find out more and to create their own stories through their research. So if you tell a story about a boat, the children may not actually do research on that, but it may cause them to do research on something else to make a story. But they were just inspired by the story itself. So you do have to always use observation to be able to gauge whether or not you need to sow a new seed.
Okay, thank you. Another question, would you insist that children do a follow-up work after you tell them the story? Would you insist?
Absolutely not. I think it's important. The thing you can insist on is that they come to the story, that they listen actively, and then those who wish to do something more with it will do something more with it. I wouldn't ever really require any particular follow-up to a story of this kind, because it doesn't matter whether or not they research the history of boats. It's important that they just understand what a human being is, and that is what you're really trying to get across. So you've got the surface of your story, which is the subject matter, the boat or the pottery or the match, but the real story is the story of us. And you would not require any follow-up work other than that they be human and that they start to use their tendencies in a positive way, regardless of what they're choosing to use those on.
Okay, thank you. Petra is asking, would you tell it to the whole class, or would you pre-select a group to tell the story to?
That also really just depends. It would work. It might work with the whole class if it's short enough. You always have to make sure that your story is only as long as the shortest attention span of the members of your group, so that you're not you don't have to make people sit longer than they're able to. And those children, some children, well, this story actually only took about 6-7 minutes. So that usually is something that most children find manageable. And then you can always say to the children at the end of a story that anybody who wishes to stay and talk a little bit more about it with you can stay, and the others can go back to work. And that's how you manage if you have a larger group, because you really don't want the children feeling like, well, the story was great, but now I have to listen to this person and that person talk, and now I really want to get back to my work, and I can't because I'm still sitting in this group and she hasn't let us go yet. So it's really important to let them go so that you also see who is interested then and there. But that might not be the children who are the most interested. So you may not need to always think about, oh, who would like this story? You just, again, want to sow the seeds, because some children may come back 2 weeks later and talk to you about that story.
Okay, thank you. More and more questions are popping up, so this I think this is really great. We have another question. Can these stories be told also to 3 to 6 classrooms?
I wouldn't tell a story with dates. And because the children in the 3 to 6, you really do want to make sure that they're exploring their sensory reality as thoroughly as possible. So to tell too many historical stories may tend to kind of give them, they don't have a sense of linear time yet. So it's a little bit like the fact that even if you tell them that dinosaurs didn't live at the same time as humans, they just kind of think, yeah, I saw the movie. I know that you're not correct, but but eventually when they do have a sense of linear time, they can. So some of the oldest ones in the casa might enjoy some of these stories if they're made simple, or if you just say something happened a long, long time ago as opposed to 8,000 years before Christ or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Petya is asking, do you tell a story to less than 3 children, or do you try to involve as much as possible? I think maybe you have answered that already, but I'll share the question anyway.
I mean, it's kind of, it may be wasted on just a few children. So it's better to also think about the fact that maybe a child doesn't think they're interested in the story, but if somebody they admire in the classroom or like in the classroom gets interested in the story, then all of a sudden they think, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. So making sure that you have a variety of children might end up sparking some interesting combinations of children because of what we know about the way the children admire each other and follow the lead of children in the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Our friends from Peekaboo Montessori School in Bulgaria are also with us. And so hello to Bulgaria. Hello. And they're asking, can you tell one story over again? Do you ever tell the same story again?
Yeah, I don't see why not, but I wouldn't make sure to tell the same story to make sure that every child heard every story or heard a particular story. Because also giving a variety of stories to different groups of children allows them to hear a similar narrative structure, but with a different subject. And that also is important for their understanding of how to write a story like that. If you just tell the same story over and over again, they don't see the pattern of the structure of the story of you have a dilemma, then you have observation, then you have creativity, and then you have the spread of something or communication that's involved in the spread of an idea or an object. And so we want the children to see that same pattern in the same way that they would see the pattern of the decimal system. And you do that by giving a variety of things that have the pattern in them, so that they can then feel like, okay, yeah, if I want to write a story like that, I need to have, the beginning needs to be about the time, the dilemma, the problems that people were facing, and then what happens, the plot, and how it then gets resolved at the end.
Okay. Someone is asking, is there a good resource for finding such stories?
I'm sure there is. I don't have, I mean, there are lots of sources, but there's often few sources that really go from the bottom up. I mean, you can go to encyclopedias as an adult and extract the information you need, and then you need to reconstruct the story to match the psychology of the child. So you can use any sources. And I'm sure that I'm not as much in touch with everything that gets put out on, but I'm sure that that's a good network thing for people to do when they do discover good written sources like this, to post that so that other people can find those written sources. But again, since these are oral stories, I often just use basic encyclopedic knowledge to start myself out in thinking about those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just had an idea. Perhaps we might create a closed Facebook group after this webinar and invite everybody who participated so that people can start sharing information with each other. It might be a good thing to do. So we'll see.
Yeah, and it's important for people to share the stories, because even if you may not like every aspect of a story that somebody else has written, it often gives you enough information to do it yourself. And after you get some practice with it, you tend not to have to write the stories down and practice them in that same way as you might when you're first starting out. You just can look at the information and say, okay, and then just create the story more spontaneously.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now there's one question that's long, so I will read it. Would you use storytelling in a wide variety of subjects or themes, for example, history, mathematics, or even physical education? Would this be the common way of teaching across all disciplines?
Absolutely. I think it's a very important method, because our brains are hardwired to take in information in that way. It helps the children come to literature because of the narrative structure, and it binds the different subject areas together in a way that sometimes just reading books do not. When you're telling these kinds of stories, you can throw in little tidbits that might inspire certain children to go off on some tangent that maybe wasn't the original intent of the story, but would be interesting for them.
Mm-hmm, thank you. And Andreas, the person who just asked that question, continues to ask, so I will skip one question before him and ask what he's asking. Do you think that this is applicable also to adults or teachers, in the sense that it provokes the natural tendencies of all humans in all age groups, that this method can be used to other age groups as well?
Most likely it can. I find that adults do respond to good storytellers. My favorite storyteller is David Attenborough, and he always gets me interested in things I never thought I would be interested in because of the way he tells the story. And if somebody else had been doing it and did not have that narrative flair that he has, I might not continue to listen. So I think that adults we all have those same needs. That's why we like a good story.
Yes, I agree. Kavya, our friend also, hello Kavya, is asking, could you talk a little more about stories beginning with dilemma and their appeal to the second plane, please?
Okay. Because these children are working on the how and the why of how things function, they really can't just be presented with just the products of human work. They have to really see that human beings, in order to make things that work, have to think and work. And so also, because children may not at first be able to imagine life, for example, without antibiotics, what was even the view of illness at that time? You have to set that scene so that the children will appreciate it. Because if you just say, oh, this is an important invention, the children, they take it for granted. So they'll just say, yeah, okay, whatever. So really having the dilemma allows the children to say, yeah, there are dilemmas in my life. and there's things that I have to solve. And then that actually means that they can be inspired to use their tendencies in a productive manner, as opposed to just accept that everything is as it is right now. And they might actually want to change things the way human beings have always wanted to change things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question from Petya. Would you encourage a child to get prepared in advance and tell a story to the other classmates?
If anybody was writing a story that they wanted to share, absolutely. And that involves a certain amount of rehearsal. And then there's some lessons you can give about memorizing the very beginning of your story, the end of your story, making a little outline, making sure that you know if you have pictures and props and things, how to manage those. You might need a helper. So getting some children to be willing to be the guinea pigs for the rehearsal also can strengthen your social group, and where of their presentation before they give it to the entire class, if they wish to. But again, it really does have to be, the motivation has to come from the children.
Okay. I'm looking. All right, there's one more question. What was your best story, Carla, or best stories that you have ever told children?
Well, the great stories from my training have always been the best stories, because they are the deepest stories with the deepest truths about physics, about chemistry, about biology, about humanity, about language, and about mathematics. And without those stories, none of these other stories they're just little vignettes. But with the great stories, these take on a different meaning because they all nest within each other. And that's probably one of the most important things about doing it in a Montessori context, is you can always relate each story to one or more of the great stories in some way. Like I mentioned, the mind and the hand working together, and that's directly out of the story of the coming of humans. So I think that it's always going to be those stories that I will remember, because those stories also are told often, and the children come back years later and say they can still hear me telling those stories in their mind.
That's great. We have run out of questions. We have 80 people watching still, and no more questions. So I'm wondering, okay, there's one coming from Montessori campus. How would you handle a child that likes to tell stories, but kind of likes to listen to himself more?
I'm not really sure. I'd have to see that child really in action to know. There's a lot of different, you have to really understand what's their motivation. Again, I think sometimes getting the right audience of people who actually listen to that child might help, and making sure that that child also has the kind of narrative structure in the story. So those are those lessons and that exposure to the story that they might need. But every child has to be seen first from the notion of the universal child, and you do everything you can for that universal child first. You support their tendencies, you give them inspiration, you give them the kinds of exploration possibilities. And then you have to watch each individual. And after that you take care of what's universal, then you really, there are no set solutions to any one child's issues. That's when you have to just get very good at observation and communicating with that child, really looking at them, really listening to them when they're telling the story. When a woman asked me last week, she said, my 6-year-old never listens to me anymore. And they used to listen to me, and now they seem to be lost in their own thoughts. And then I asked her, I said, well, do you ask the child to tell you what they're thinking about? Do you find out what they're thinking about? Because if they're thinking about the history of boats or the dinosaurs or whatever, then they are in a different place in their mind, and they may not hear your need to get out of the house in the morning.
Bogdan is asking something that relates to what you just mentioned. What kind of stories would you tell to children that appear to live in a fantasy world every day? And I can relate to that. I know some children who kind of seem to live in their own bubble, and you kind of see them, you know, constantly somewhere in their little world. So I think that's possibly what Bogdan is referring to.
Well, the greatest antidote to fantasy is the beauty of the real world. So telling stories of truth is always going to be the best solution. It may not be an instant type of antidote. Because the child themselves will decide, really, maybe not consciously, when it's safe to come out of that world. And you have to make the real world so beautiful and so inviting that it's worth it to come out. And that's what the Montessori classroom always has to strive to do, is to make the real world be so fascinating and so beautiful that it's worth it to come out of whatever bubble you're in. And some children, at least in my experience, it didn't look like they were coming out ever. But when I met them later as adults or near adults, they just didn't show me that. So it was frustrating for me, but it did get through to them. They just didn't show me. So you have to just keep trying.
Okay, thank you. Rumiana is asking, in the history of mankind, there are quite many cruel events. What approach shall we use to present those unhuman, quote unquote, acts to children? For example, stories about Hitler, Nazi times, and that kind of thing.
Well, you at first, you always still have to when you go back to the tendencies of exploration, orientation, and so on, those are not moral qualities. They're amoral qualities. And so we human beings have the possibility to do great good and to do great evil because our tendencies are not moral or immoral. They just are. And we can explore in a moral way, or we can explore in a not so moral way. And I think that but at first you have to give the children this notion of this is what we do, and we are most successful when we use these tendencies in a moral way. And that's where the virtues that we can talk more explicitly about. What is it that makes us successful in using our tendencies to help our fellow humans and to help ourselves? And then when the children actually understand that there are choices to be made and there are moral muscles to be exercised on every single day in the life of a human being, that's when you can approach the not so great things. But if you give the children the message from the beginning that human beings are evil, then you are not really making it worth being a human being. And so the children have to have at the base of their understanding, at the basis of their worldview, they have to feel that human beings have the possibility for great good.
Okay, thank you. We still have 73 people watching, so it means what you're saying is really interesting because we have kept attention of many people for almost an hour, so that's great. And so we have a few more minutes with Carla. Do you guys have still any questions? Is there anything else you want to ask Carla? And we'll give you a little bit time to think. It's okay. And type up your questions if you still want to ask something. And otherwise, if you can't think of anything else, I'd like to invite you all. I'm sure you all know that Carla is going to train in Prague very soon. Oh yeah, we have another question, Carla. When is the next webinar scheduled? That's a great question, and let me talk to Carla about that, and we'll let you know. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do something like that very soon. Some feedback to you, Carla. Thank you from Norway. Thank you, Carla. I will keep trying to make the children see the beauty of the real world. Really interesting talk. Thank you so much. Thank you from India. So we have so many thanks. That was such an insightful conversation. Thank you, Carla. So people are really excited. Thank you, very inspiring opportunity. A message from Bulgaria, best wishes from Romania. So everybody wants to talk to you and they can't. I'm sure they're frustrated because they can't talk to you in person, but I'm trying to convey the exciting messages coming to us. It was very nice to see you and hear you, Carla. Wishing you all the best. Okay, so
thank you, I appreciate it.
I'd like to wrap this up, everyone. Carla is going to train in Prague. We are planning a 6 to 12 training starting in February 2017. The course is almost filled up, so if any of you are thinking to still join us, please go ahead and do. And we will email you in a follow-up to this webinar all the information about the course, so you can look at it and consider your options. We are going to let you know about the next webinar. Carla, thank you very much. This was really great. There's more and more thanks coming in our message box, but we'll just let you go. Thank you on behalf of Montessori Institute, and we really look forward to the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care wherever you are. Thank you.